Hi everyone, welcome to the VARC Solutions of Slot 2 CAT 2025. So the first passage, let's read the first paragraph and look at what the topic is and what the argument is. Time and again, whenever a population of Mexican tetrafish was swept into a cave and survived long enough for natural selection to have its way, its eyes disappeared. So whenever these fishes, a particular variant of fishes, they were there for long enough, eventually what happened, their eyes disappeared, right? Natural selection to have its way, it does not mean that it's in one generation, over generations that happened, right? But it's not that everything have been lost in cavefish. It's not that they lost everything. Many enhancements have also happened. Studies have found that cave-dwelling fish can detect lower levels of amino acids than surface fish can. They have more taste buds and a higher density of sensitive cells alongside their bodies that let them sense water pressure and flow. So what is the topic of this passage? The topic of this passage, firstly, whenever we're looking at topic of the passage, you just need 2 or 3 key words. It's almost like these are the main characters in the story, right? So first one, cavefish. And the second one is the adaptation of cavefish, right? So cavefish and their adaptation, that's the topic, right? And what's the argument? When cavefish adapted to their environment inside the caves, this Mexican fish, they became cavefish later, I'm supposing, right? Inside the caves, by losing its eyes and many other changes. You don't need to remember all the other changes. You know that main thing, they lost their eyes, and some other things also, enhancements happen. Yeah. Now let's go to the next paragraph. Killing the processes that support the formation of the eye is quite literally what happens. So what happens is there are some processes through which the eyes are formed. That process itself goes off. Just like non-cave dwelling members of the species, all cavefish embryos start making eyes. So just like all fish species, they start with making eyes. But after a few hours, cells in the developing eye start dying. So all cavefish it's not like they're born without eyes. They are born with eyes and the eyes start developing, or rather in a few minutes only the embryos start making eyes, but after a few hours the developing start dying and until the entire structure has disappeared. Developmental biologist Mr. Riddle thinks that this apparent inefficiency may be unavoidable. It's inefficient, right? First you're making the eyes, right? As eyes start getting made and then they disappear, right? The early development of the brain and eye are completely intertwined. They happen together. So it's not possible for eyes to not happen at all, eyes to not come there at all, because it's unavoidable. Along with the brain, the development of eyes also happen. This means that the least disruptive way for eyelessness to evolve may be to start making an eye and get rid of it. So this is the most effective way. So here we know cavefish are not born without eyes, but they develop eyes and then they disappear, right? So that's the process. Fairly simple paragraph. Next one. Because the third paragraph is small, I used 2 paragraphs. It's easy to see why cavefish would be at a disadvantage if they were to maintain expensive tissues they aren't using, since relatively little lives or grows in their caves. The fish are likely surviving on a meager diet, mostly of bat feces and organic waste. Researchers keeping cavefish in labs have discovered that genetically, the creatures are exquisitely adapted to absorbing and storing nutrients. So it's saying that obviously inside a cave, everything is dark. When it's dark, even if you have eyes, you cannot see anything. So what's the point of having eyes? So that is why over a few generations, cavefish adapted to not have any eyes. But they have another superpower. What is that superpower? They're exquisitely adapted to absorbing and storing nutrients. That is something that they're very good at. Next paragraph. Fats can be toxic for tissues, Roner explains, so they are stored in fat cells. Why are fats not stored in tissues but in separate cells? Because fats are toxic. But when these cells get too big, they can burst, which is why we see chronic inflammation in humans and other animals that have stored a lot of fat in their tissues. So whenever there is excess fat, what happens? There is inflammation in the body. Right? Yet, a 2020 study showed that even very well-fed cavefish had fewer signs of inflammation in their fat tissues than surface fish, right? Normally, if you have excess fat, there is inflammation. But cavefish do not have inflammation even when they have consumed excess fat compared to the surface fish. Even in sparse cave conditions, wild cavefish can sometimes get very, very fat. This is presumably because whenever food ends up in a cave, the fish eat as much as possible since there may be nothing else for a long time. Right? So why do cavefish get so fat despite the fact that there might not be enough food availability inside a cave? Because they don't know when they're going to get food next. They eat a lot. And despite having so much fat, the inflammation is very, very low. Intriguingly, Riddle says that fat is usually bright yellow because of high levels of carotenoids. They're saying fat is usually bright yellow, that's the color of the fat, because of high levels of this. The substance in carrots that your grandmother used to tell you were good for your eyes. So, they're saying that carrots are good for eyes. And the fat of the cavefish is bright yellow in color because of high levels of what is there in a carrot. Right? So what is the argument here? So the argument here, if you more or less, these two paragraphs are just giving you some additional information. And the main argument here is that since food sources are meager, cavefish eat a lot and accumulate a lot of fat, inside. They store a lot of fat, but for them, it does not cause inflammation. That's the key thing. They have a lot of fat, but they don't cause inflammation. That we see in other animals, including humans. Para 5. The first thing that came to our mind, of course, was that they were accumulating these because they don't have eyes. So the first thing I thought that, okay, they're having very bright yellow color, this thing, which with high levels of color, which is because of carotenoids, which are good for eyes. Maybe why they're accumulating this thing is because they don't have eyes, because the eyes have something to do with this, right? In this species, such ideas can be tested, right? Scientists can cross fish with eyes and cavefish without eyes and look at what their offspring are like, right? When that's done, Riddle says, researchers see no link between eye presence or the size and accumulation of carotenoids. So they're saying you normally think that, okay, there is why these carotenoids are getting accumulated, which is why the fats are bright red in color, and eye tissue, and whether eyes are there or not, right? He says that they found that there was no link, right? Carotenoids are good for eyes. Because they don't have those eyes, all of those carotenoids are getting stuck, caught in the fat cells or whatever it is, getting stored as fat, whatever it is. They're saying they found no link. No link between eyelessness, between eye presence or size and the accumulation of carotenoids. Some eyeless cavefish had fat that was practically white, indicating this thing. Some fish had white also. There was absolutely no fat. That means very low carotenoid levels. Instead, Riddle thinks these carotenoids may be another adaptation to suppress inflammation, which might be as important in the wild as catfish are likely over it. So that this eyelessness and carotenoids are not linked, right? But carotenoids are why the inflammation is low despite having high fats. So as per the passage and these researchers, eyelessness and carotenoids have no link, and that kind of bright yellow fats, their carotenoids are what is helping them suppress the inflammation despite having a lot of fat. So that is what's the presence of carotenoids in cavefish fat, maybe to suppress inflammation caused by overeating. So we're seeing the recap. Cavefish adapted without eyes, inside, and some other, changes. They are not born without eyes, but they develop later. Since food availability is meager, they eat a lot, lots of fat, but surprisingly, inflammation is low, right? Inflammation is low, but why? Because why? These fats are bright yellow in color, lots of carotenoids, and that might be the reason why the inflammation is low. So broadly, the main idea, it's a very, very descriptive passage. There is no main argument apart from the last one. So cavefish adapted to life in caves by getting rid of of their eyes and developing the ability to store lots of fat without inflammation. That's the whole story. Right? So if you look at the in terms of the level of the passage, I would say it is a good 7 out of 10, not or 8 out of 10, not very, very complicated, but still a bit painful to read with all the details and the couple of those things as to what causes what, a bit of a CR, bit of science sort of CR passage, going on here. Yeah? Now let's look at the questions. First question. Which of the following explains why the apparent inefficiency is unavoidable? Why is the apparent inefficiency unavoidable? What is the apparent inefficiency? This eyelessness is not happening directly. First, eyelessness is happening. Eyes start getting developed in the embryo stage. After a few hours, this thing, right? So they start developing, and then they get rid of them, right? Then they're saying it's unavoidable. Why is it unavoidable? So the inefficiency is this: that first eyes develop and then go. The answer is clearly given that the brain and the eye cells both develop in parallel. That is why this happens at the same time. So this is the reason that we have, right? We have the shadow answer. Now let's go to the options. First one, Mexican cavefish are similar to non-cave dwelling variants in their early stages of development. And they're saying, so basically they're saying that this is a common feature, this cannot be done away with, right? So instead of giving the specific reason, they're giving the generic reason that despite the fact that they don't have eyes, the process remains the same. Eyes start getting, made like in everybody else in the brain only. So we'll keep this. We'll look at the other reasons. The lack of light in the caves kills the eye cells. Nothing is mentioned about light killing eye cells. So this goes. The inefficiency resulting from eyelessness is compensated by enhancement. These are two separate things. The eyes and other enhancements have nothing to do with each other. Unavoidability is because of brain cells and eye cells developing at the same time. The caves have poor, inconsistent availability. It's not about food and nutrition. The result is very, very clear. In all animals or in most other species, in the similar species that they said, that in the fish species, brain development and eye development happens at the same time. That is why. So while they've not mentioned the specific reason, they've given the generic reason as to why this happens. So even if you do not understand option 1, you know this is the reason and you eliminate everything, you know that this one is the answer. Yeah. So if you'd wanted to check, you could have gone back and checked with the paragraph as well to find out. Yeah. So the answer to this one, option 1. The next question, which of the following results for the cross between surface fish with eyes and cavefish without eyes would invalidate Riddle's inference from the experiment? So the whole experiment was done, crossing and everything. Riddle's inference is very, very simple. There is no link, look at the last line, no link between eye presence or accumulation of this thing. So irrespective of, there is no link between eyelessness or, and the presence or high levels of carotenoid, that these are completely not linked. They found that cavefish which do not have eyes, they have very, very high level of carotenoids. They thought both of that are linked. Riddle says there is no link. You want to invalidate it. To invalidate means what happens? That means you need to show that there is a link between eyelessness and levels of carotenoids, right? So levels of carotenoids are indicated by what? They're indicated by the color of the fat, whether it is bright yellow or pale white, right? Now we look at the options and see what's happening. Option 1, only eyeless offspring had yellow fat. Only eyeless offspring had yellow fat means yellow fat is an indicator of what? Of carotenoid levels. That means there is a link between eyelessness and carotenoid levels. So technically this would invalidate Riddle's inference. So we are going to keep this. Let's go to the other options. Some offspring with eyes had yellow fat. Some X is Y. It does not necessarily, invalidate this. Some eyeless offspring had white fat. Some eyeless offspring had white fat. Some does not. This thing again disqualify this, right? Some offspring with eyes had white fat. Again, some does not disqualify this. You need to invalidate something. So only eyeless cavefish had yellow fat, means high levels of carotenoids, means there is definitely a link, and which is why that is our answer. So the answer to this one, option 1. Third question. All of the following statements from the passage describe adaptation in Mexican tetrafish except. So everything, all of these 4 statements should be an adaptation except one statement. Which one is not an adaptation? So for this, you cannot frame a shadow answer, so we have to go to the options. First one. But when these cells get too big, they can burst, which is why we often see chronic inflammation in humans and other animals that have stored fat in their tissues. Now, this is not a statement about adaptation of tetrafish. This is talking about something else. So I'm not sure whether this is actually an adaptation of this thing. So I think this is the except answer, but we'll keep this, look at the rest. So 3 statements should be an adaptation, 1 should be not. This is not even mentioning cavefish, right? Even in sparse cave conditions, wild cavefish can sometimes get very fat. That's an adaptation because they consume a lot and they can store a lot. Right? There's definitely that is. We want an except. Since relatively little grows or in their caves, the fish are likely to survive on a meager diet of mostly bat feces and this thing. So this is also an adaptation, how they are managing to survive in the caves. Third one, it is easy to see why cavefish would be at a disadvantage if they were to maintain expensive tissues that they are not using. It's a disadvantage to have expensive tissues. What is the expensive tissues? Eyes. And what did they do to adapt? They left that. They got rid of the eyes. So that's also an adaptation, which is why this also goes. So again, for the third question in a row, the answer to this one is option number 1. On the basis of the information in the passage, what is most likely the function of carotenoids in the Mexican tetra cavefish? This was clearly stated in that last paragraph. They did all of those experiments and they found that possibly this bright red yellow color of the fat, which indicates the presence of carotenoids, is for what? It is to suppress the inflammation, right? It is to suppress or prevent inflammation. This is clearly stated. To render bright yellow color, it's not about the color. Who cares about the color? There has to be some use. To act as a substitute for eyes, no, that's also not the reason. To help fat cells store nutrients, there is no helping in the storing nutrients that is mentioned anywhere. To control inflammation from the bursting of fat cells, definitely to control the inflammation. That is actually mentioned, that it's to control inflammation. Right? So science passage, not very tough. I would say, out of these, except which of the following would invalidate the riddles, this thing. Apart from that, 3 questions were fairly easy. This was a case where you could have gotten 9 marks from this passage for sure. Absolutely no doubt about it. So relatively tricky read, not very, very easy, but fairly straightforward questions. In my book, because the paragraphs are very small, I thought we'll do 2 paragraphs together, right? In my book Searches, I chronicle how big tech companies have exploited human language for their gain. Okay, so we let this happen. So it's about, we know that straight away the passage is about big tech companies and how they've exploited the human language for gain, right? We let this happen, I argue, because we also benefit somewhat from using their products. It's a dynamic that makes us complicit in big tech's accumulation of wealth and power. We are both victims and beneficiaries. I describe this complicity, but I also enact it through my own internet archives, my Google searches, my Amazon product reviews, and yes, my ChatGPT dialogues. So what they're saying is that, one, big tech gains wealth and power by exploiting human language. But in this something, we are also complicit in as humans, because we are also constantly using all of these tech products by giving it reviews and everything else. So, because we are getting some benefit from it, right? So we are both victims of the exploitation of big tech, and we are also the beneficiaries. So it's a relationship. It's a complex, relationship where we are both benefiting from something and we are also victims of it. Next paragraph. People often describe chatbots' textual output as bland or generic, the linguistic equivalent of a beige office building. What are they saying? Chatbots' language is typically bland and generic. Generic means very, very regular, run-of-the-mill statements. The language is very bland. Bland means favorless. The linguistic equivalent of a beige office meaning, the linguistic means like language, what's a beige? Beige is light brown in color, right? So all these office buildings, they're saying that basically the chatbot uses language which is very, very boring, which is very, very plain, and which is very, very regular, right? OpenAI's products are built to sound like a colleague, right? Not to sound like person, sound like a colleague, as OpenAI puts it, using language that coming from a person would sound polite, empathetic, kind, rationally optimistic, and engaging, among other qualities. OpenAI describes these strategies as helping its products seem professional and approachable. This appears to be bound up with us, making us feel safe. So OpenAI is saying that it will seem like somebody who's kind, somebody who's professional, somebody who's polite, right? So they want their products to feel professional at one level and approachable. Both are same. Suppose it's approachable. Your friend can also be approachable. It can be friendly. But they're saying no, they want it to sound professional, which is why it's like a colleague, right? A polite colleague. This appears to be bound up with making us feel safe. That's what the author is saying. The topic of the passage is what very, very clear right at the beginning, first sentence itself. Big tech, human language. Right? The second paragraph is also completely about ChatGPT's language. So we know that big tech and the exploitation of human language, that's the topic. What is the argument? Big tech's accumulation of wealth and power has been made possible by exploitation of human language, and possibly because, it's bound up, which tries to make us feel safe, right? So big tech, exploiting human language for their gain and using language in a way that makes us feel safe, right? Now let's go to the next paragraph. Trust is a challenge for AI companies, partly because their products regularly produce falsehoods and reify sexist, racist, US-central cultural norms. Okay, they're saying, why is trust a problem? Because the products are usually generating a lot of false claims because they're just picking stuff randomly from the internet, right? Or whatever their sources are, right? And the reify means make something as if this is the only truth, so to say, right? So perpetuate for a very, very long time and make it an objective truth, right? Like sexist, racist, US-centric cultural norms. While the companies are working on these problems, they persist. OpenAI found that its latest systems generate errors at a higher rate than its previous system. It is trying to see that this doesn't happen, but it keeps happening. When I prompted, in the book, I wrote about inaccuracies and biases and also demonstrated them with the products. When I prompted Microsoft's Bing image creator to produce a picture of engineers and space explorers, it gave me an entirely male cast, right? So if you say, give me a picture of an engineer or a space explorer, it is only giving you male. That means by default, assumption is that women cannot be part of that, right? When my father asked ChatGPT to edit his writing, it transmuted his perfectly correct Indian English into American English, right? So it automatically corrected his, the Indian English to American English, though there was no error. So it is giving a preference to American English. Those weren't flukes. Research suggests that both tendencies are widespread. They're saying these are not flukes, that one-off incidents. These things keep happening and keep repeating as a pattern. So what's the argument here? So trust is a problem for AI companies because their products keep generating falsehoods and biases, right? So that is why trust is a problem, and they've given examples. Para 4. In my own ChatGPT dialogues, I wanted to enact how the product's veneer of collegial neutrality could lull us into absorbing false or biased responses without much critical engagement. It's saying product's veneer of collegial neutrality. Now, even if you don't understand this phrase, so what is the only word you can understand? Maybe neutral, right? So the product's veneer, so basically veneer is the coating. So coating of collegial. Collegial means something like a colleague or an atmosphere, of a set of colleagues. So collegial, neutrality, right? Neutral, so basically that office colleague type of, neutral attitude could lull us into absorbing false and biased responses without much engagement. So the author is saying that from his own ChatGPT dialogues, because ChatGPT speaks in such a simple, a colleague-like, friendly, neutral manner, not taking any stances or the tone is very, very seemingly, friendly and neutral. We might not actually get disturbed by all these biases and falsehoods. We won't actually question, hey, this is absolutely bullshit. Okay. Over time, ChatGPT seemed to be guiding me to write a more positive book about big tech. So he was using ChatGPT to see how it is responding to his book on big tech, right? Including editing my description of OpenAI CEO Sam Altman to call him a visionary and a pragmatist. It's saying, okay, so it's a ChatGPT is suggesting to give a very, very positive view of OpenAI and the boss, and the CEO as well, Sam Altman. I'm not aware of research on whether ChatGPT tends to favor big tech, OpenAI or Altman. And I can only guess why it seemed that way in a conversation. It's saying, I don't know whether ChatGPT has been trained for that, to actually give a positive image of tech companies, OpenAI, this thing. So he has no idea about any research of that sort. He's only trying to guess. OpenAI explicitly states that its products shouldn't attempt to influence users' thinking. OpenAI is clearly saying our products should not influence users' thinking. When I asked ChatGPT about some of these issues, it blamed biases in its training data. So when it asked ChatGPT said, the issue is that the problem is in the training data. Though I suspect my arguably leading questions played a role too. So I said, I'm asking these probing questions. So maybe I'm asking the question in such a way that I'm going to give a particular answer. I'll say a particular answer. When I queried ChatGPT about its rhetoric means the way it uses language. The way I communicate is designed to foster trust and confidence in my responses, which can be both helpful and potentially misleading, right? So it's like when I'm saying that I use this so that, I speak in such a way. So basically you see, what is the author doing? The author is actually having a chat with ChatGPT. And he's saying, as I'm having this discussion and expressing my views, ChatGPT is, kind of giving a particular kind of response. It's like maybe I am also playing a role in influencing it in a particular way to get these particular responses. And ChatGPT is accepting saying something of this sort. The way I communicate is designed. Now, this is something which is a response to the author's, discussion. So what about this paragraph? It is saying that the polite and friendly language used by tech products tends to make us ignore their falsehoods and biases. It is not clear whether it has been trained to push a positive image of big tech. These two things we know, right? Because it speaks sweetly, we tend to not necessarily, we kind of tend to ignore the falsehoods and biases. If somebody is, say, aggressively pushing a racist view or a biased view, you will take offense. But if somebody is speaking in a very, very neutral way and a friendly way, you're saying you're likely to ignore that. Para 5. OpenAI has its own goals, of course. Among them, it emphasizes wanting to build AI that benefits all humanity. But while a company is controlled by a not-profit with that mission, its funders still seek a return on their investment. That will presumably require getting people to use products such as ChatGPT even more than they already are. A goal that is easier to accomplish if people see these products as trustworthy collaborators. So essentially, what is this last paragraph summarizing and saying? This whole neutral language, friendly language, polite language, boring language, all of this is so that people feel that it is a professional, friendly, approachable. Now, once you have such a sort of a language, what do? People would tend to get a feeling of trust despite all the falsehoods and biases, right? So this language is a way to foster like this person is a good colleague or this ChatGPT is a good tool for me to keep using. So he says these companies are deliberately the intent of the language is this. Intent of the language is to create an environment of, to create, to use the parlance of our times, a feeling that it's a safe space, it's a friendly person, so that you keep using it more and more because they need profits, despite being a not-for-profit. So main idea, big tech AI products deploy polite and friendly language to generate trust with users and make them feel safe, thus increasing usage. Yeah, they're fairly clear. All of the following statements from the passage affirm the disjunct between the claims about AI made by tech companies and what AI actually does accept. Okay, what is the claim made by tech companies? That, hey, we don't want to influence human thinking in any way. Right? The author tries to show that OpenAI's product and ChatGPT uses friendly language to generate trust despite throwing up falsehoods and biases. Right? So OpenAI's claim is that, hey, we don't want to influence human thinking in any way. The author wants to show that they're doing a lot of things in such a way that it is actually trying to influence us in a particular way. Right? So now, the three options should be revolving around this gap between companies using ChatGPT and particular human language to influence us in particular ways, and one option should have nothing to do with it. First option. It's a dynamic that makes us complicit in big tech's accumulation of wealth and power. We are both victims and beneficiaries. Now, this is related, it's there right in the first paragraph. It's saying that, what is the dynamic? I am somebody who's using a lot of these products because I get some benefit. Because I'm getting this benefit, I'm using this, and then it is taking all my data and then using that data to exploit, to generate more and more wealth and power. Right? So I am only feeding it the data that again it is using to generate more wealth and power and control. Right? So essentially, I'm not sure whether this option is exactly linked to this or not about trust and about not want to influence human thinking. I'll keep this. I'll go to the next option. In my own ChatGPT dialogues, I wanted to enact how the products veneer of neutrality could lull us into absorbing false or biased responses without much engagement. This is clearly something which the author is talking about. The claim is, hey, we don't want to influence. But the author wants to show that you say you don't want to influence, but your deliberate use of this language leads us to ignore your biases. So this is definitely something that affirms the disjunct. We are looking for an option which does not affirm the disjunct. So this is not an answer. Our answer. Next one. When I prompted Bing's image generator produced a picture of engineers that gave me an entire male cast. Again, this is this is affirming the bias. Company says we try to avoid any bias. This is again affirming the bias. We want something which does not affirm the bias. So this is also my answer. Last one. I'm not aware of research on whether ChatGPT tends to favor big tech, OpenAI or Altman, and I can only guess. Now, this is not an example. The author is saying, see, I don't know whether they're deliberately trying to influence it or not. So this does not affirm the disjunct for sure. I'm not very sure of one. This usually happens on CAT questions where you might not necessarily be sure of one option, but another option, when you're left with one option, you can definitely reject. This I can definitely reject because this is not affirming or reinforcing that disjunct between what companies want to say and what the actual actions are. This is not saying that they're trying to influence or they're biased in any way. So which is why this will go. And and this is the first one will go, and this is the answer for sure, right? Because this one clearly has nothing about affirming the bias. The first one is still related to affirming the bias in what ways? That we are giving it data and it's using that data to finally control us. Yeah. So the answer on this one, option 4. The author compares AI-generated text with a beige office building for all the following reasons, except. The author compares AI-generated this thing for all the following reasons, except. Very, very clear. We know that he wants to show that it is boring, it is polite, it's like a colleague, it is friendly. So that is why beige office building, like a simple, polite, regular office building like everything else. So all the following reasons except. So one option should not be anything but this. It should be it should not be related to being boring or being generic or being polite or whatever. First one, AI generates responses that lack specificity and nuance. Are not specific and nuance means they are what? This is the exact opposite of generic, right? So this is lacking specificity means it's very, very generic and run-of-the-mill response. Right? So this is one thing that CAT options always do. If it says X, if the passage says X is greater than Y, the option will say Y is less than X, right? So passage says it gives generic responses. This one is saying responses lack specificity. So this is definitely one of the reasons why the author is using this term. It's related to that beige term. We are looking for except. So 3 options will be the reason and 1 won't be the reason. This is the reason, so this is not an answer. Next one, warm, polite. That's also related to the beige building only. AI tends to blame its training data. AI's training data has nothing to do with this. Beige as a color is always used to make a link with the tone. So this definitely is not a reason. Last one, AI aims to foster of trust and credibility. Yeah, trust and credibility, professional and approachable colleague. That is what they'd want. So definitely that is also there. Beige office building is that something that doesn't stand out too much or whatever. So this option 3 has nothing to do with the link to the AI's tone, where there's this whole sequence, beige color, is linked to AI's tone, which is why the answer on this one is option 3. The author is least likely to agree, right? Least likely to agree will not stand for something, at all on this one, which are the following claims. So the author feels that the big tech products have been intentionally designed to manipulate. So any option which says that they have not been intentionally designed, there is no hidden agenda to manipulate human language for their advantage, that is something that the author is least likely to agree with, right? The neutrality of AI is motivated by economic concerns. Author will definitely agree because he's saying that this whole safe language is for that. You feel very, very safe and the language is very, very trustworthy. So you tend to use it more because even the not-for-profit people who are funders, they need a return on the investment. ChatGPT favors AI companies and their officials like Sam Altman in its responses. The author mentions it. He says, I don't know whether it's trained or not, but this happens, right? So so this one definitely the author is something that the author least likely to agree with. I'm not really sure he might agree with this. So this can also go. Next one. When we use AI, we become accomplices to the exploitative practices of big tech companies. This is clearly stated. We also, as humans, are complicit. This is that first paragraph, right? Because whenever we are using the products, because we are getting a benefit from it, we are also giving it a lot of data. So this goes back to that first thing. We are both victims and beneficiaries because we are complicit in the process. This is clearly mentioned in that first paragraph. So author will agree with this also. The neutrality of AI is conducive to critical thinking. neutrality is not conducive to critical thinking. Author is least likely to agree with this, because he says that because it uses such neutral language, we actually forget to think critically. So this is the exact opposite is what the author says. Because it uses such smooth language, you don't question it. We don't actually critically think in its presence. It lulls us into a sense of comfort. So this is exactly the opposite. This is something that the author is least likely to agree with. So even if you're thinking about option 2, author says that I don't know whether the training is happening or not. So if you're caught between 2 and 4 also, 4 is definitely something that is exactly opposite to what the author says, right? Which is why the answer on this one, option 4. On the basis of the purpose of the examples in the passage, pick the odd one out from the following AI-generated responses. Something was mentioned about AI-generated responses. Which is the odd one out of the AI-generated response, right? So let's see. So the purpose is to show that what were the examples there to show for? The examples were there to show that AI generates biases and falsehoods. Now, which is the odd one out? So 3 options will show that AI generates biased responses, and 1 option will show not. When I queried ChatGPT about its rhetoric, it responded, the way I communicate is designed to foster trust and confidence in my responses, which can be both helpful and potentially misleading. This is an example where the author is saying that I have given it some leading information. I'm not sure whether it gives biases or not, right? In the context of this whole paragraph, he says, hey, it gave me positive things about Sam Altman and big tech and OpenAI, but there is little research to show that it is the case. It's also because I am asking leading questions, right? So this is not an example which shows that AI is creating a biased response. If anything, it is actually an honest response. So we'll keep this. We'll look at the rest of the options. Right? When my father asked ChatGPT, clearly an exception, a case, example of bias. Converting Indian English, which is correct, into American English, example of bias. So this is a point. Over time, ChatGPT seemed to be guiding me to write a more positive book and calling. Again, this is an example of bias, saying that, okay, you'd want to give a positive image of this. So this is also the same thing, example of bias. When I prompted this thing, again, this is given as an example of bias. So these 3 are given openly as examples of bias, whereas the first one is not given as an example of bias. If anything, it's an example to show that it's actually honest. So odd one out in this is option 1. This book takes the position that setting in literature is more than just backdrop, the setting of plays. That important insight into literary text can be made by paying close attention to how authors craft plays, as well as how plays functions in a narrative. They're saying that setting is not just a backdrop. In literature, it is more than just a backdrop, right? And important insights we can gain if we pay close attention to how the author is creating a setting. The authors included in this reference work, in this thing, engage deeply with either real or imagined geography. So they're engaging deeply with the geography. Whether it's real or imaginary, doesn't matter. They care about human decisions have shaped landscapes and how landscapes have shaped human practices and values. Some of the best writing is highly vivid, employing language of the senses, because this is the primary means through which humans know physical space, right? So it's saying that, okay, the way the author describes a place in literature, they've taken books where it shows that how human beings have influenced the landscape, and the landscape has influenced human beings, right? And the writing is very, very vivid and very, very descriptive, because this is the way to, why is it is very, very vivid, depictive and employing language of the senses? Because we come to a place through the senses, right? Through our eyes, we come to know of a place. Through our nose, we come to know of a place and the smells and everything else. So literature is the topic is very simple. Literature and geography in the way it's described. What is the argument? Setting a literature is more than just a backdrop. Descriptions of places and landscape within a narrative show how humans and landscapes influence each other. Yep. Next one. Literature can offer valuable perspectives on physical and cultural geography. Unlike scientific reports, a literary narrative can provide the emotional component missing from the scientific record. In human experience, geographical places have a spiritual or emotional component in addition to and as part of the physical layout. They're saying that scientific reports only give a physical description, right? But humans have an emotional as well as spiritual connection to a landscape, and that is what books and literature show us. The emotional component, although subjective, yes, the emotional component might be subjective, right? We might think that this hill itself is, a very, very sacred hill. It's an energy center, or then people might worship a hill. It is subjective, but it's no less real than a surveyor's map. Just like a map might show there is a hill, the human being's relationship with that hill is also real. Human consciousness of a place is experienced in a multimodal manner. Multimodal manner means visual, spiritual, emotional. Histories of places live on in many forms, one of which is human memory or imagination. We also think of how this place was before and everything, right? So I'm saying, unlike just a scientific this gives an entirely an additional component, which is an emotional and spiritual relationship that humans share with the places they inhabited. Very interesting. This thing is, I just finished reading 2 books because I'm based out of Bangalore. I felt, and I read a lot of literature. I thought I should read some book which is a legendary book from the most iconic piece of literature from Karnataka, in Kannada. So I just finished reading the English version of Kuvempu's Bride in the Hills. The novel is 800 pages long, but it felt like it was 350 pages. It was completely set in the Malnad region of Karnataka. So Malnad region is where you have Coorg and Sakleshpur and all of these places. So I have visited this place many years ago, around maybe 10 years ago. I had gone for a trip there. But reading this book and that description about this place in various seasons, about particular points where it's so calm, where one of the characters goes to meditate and everything else, right? So all of these things, that's from the second book, not that book. The book was so good that I read 2 books back to back, right? So it gave me the impression because I had also gone there years later. The book is set in the early 1900s. I went maybe say 10, 15 years ago, but still it felt in that landscape. I could feel that, okay, I was in the same place, maybe a few changes around, but 100 years ago or whatever. Right? So this is what the author is trying to say, that a scientific map can give one kind of information, right? But a literary book can give another kind of information, right? Another kind of connect. Para 3. Both real and imaginary landscapes provide insight into human experience of place, right? So how do we experience? The pursuit of such a topic speaks to both the valuable knowledge producing from bridging disciplines and combining material from both arts and sciences to better understand the condition. He's saying, see, now instead of just looking at, say, the sciences, you look at literature, right? And then you combine and bridge this gap. Don't look at these two as separate things. You will understand things about the human condition in a much, much better fashion, right? So, for example, one of the things that some of the, dishes are quite famous from Coorg and everything, right? So, a couple of, Coorgi dishes are very, very famous. So, I could see that in this novel, which is set 100 years back also, it's that same dish that people wanted to make, right? So, I could see that, okay, this is not something that is just a dish here, but even 100 years back in every festival or after every hunting season or whatever, this was the main excitement, right? So it's saying that if we combine both, we will get a better understanding. The perspectives that most concern cultural geographers, people are trying to understand culture, and often those regarding movement and migration, cultivation of natural resources, organization of place, the latter to reflect concerns of built environment, topics shared with the field of architectural study. Many of these concerns are also reflected in the work of sociologists, right? So what are they saying is, people try to study how was this place organized, how did they do cultivation, right? And how did migration happen? Now, all of these things, right, are not just related to, say, people who are doing then in other disciplines like sociology and architecture as well. So what the author is trying to say is that scholars from literary studies can contribute the aesthetic dimension to what might otherwise be a purely ideological approach, right? It's saying that by, say, doing the people who are some literary scholars to other disciplines also, instead of it being a pure academic exercise, that can be it can add a lot of richness through the aesthetic dimension, right? So that's what they're saying. So the sciences should not be looked at in isolation from the arts. Literature studies can be a good bridge to understand the human condition. Literature can bring together material that spans different branches of science. For example, a literary description of a place may involve not only the environment and geography, but also the noises and quality of lights. Noises, for example, the sounds of the birds that are there in the morning. So even in this book, they list the names of all the birds, or how people from different races or classes can experience the same place in different ways linked to those racial and class disparities, right? So for example, when we go to a particular place, we might look at this as a fantastic view or whatever. But the people who have to work really hard in those forests, they might have a completely different way. They're saying that how the experience of a place, because different characters can come from different backgrounds, can change. Literary text can also account for the way in which absence of people or animals affects the human observer or understanding. So the presence of people or animals, presence or absence of them, how does it affect? The books can help us understand that. Both literary and scientific approaches to a place are necessary. It's saying both are necessary. It's not as if only literature will do or only science will do. Working in unison to achieve a complete record of an environment. It is important to note that interdisciplinary nature of this work teaches us that landscapes are not static. They are not unchanged by human culture. At least part of our identity derives from people who inhabit them, and the way this thing, intersection of scientific, this thing, that prime importance due to the complexity. If you look at this whole passage, I felt this was the easiest one to read despite a lot of heavy language, because the main idea is consistent throughout. Literature is a wonderful tool to understand a place, right? And the people's interaction in their place, understand human condition, and it should be used in conjunction with all the other sciences so that we can understand the human condition better. So it's only one idea in this whole passage, right? Literature can provide rich nuance and detail about the interaction of different humans with their surroundings and should be used in a complementary conjunction. So basically you need to use both. So which is why I felt this was very, very easy, right? So main idea, literature can provide rich nuance and detail about the interaction. Main idea is mentioned right in the last paragraph. So whatever was the main idea of the last paragraph, that itself is the main idea of the passage, that literature can provide us such with rich details and different dimensions that it should be used along with the other sciences in unison to, so that, we can understand the human condition better, right? So the first question, all of the following statements, if false, would contradict the arguments in the passage except that. Now, whenever you have such a question, the shadow answer, or whether when you decode that question, that becomes absolutely important, right? If false would contradict. If false would contradict means if true, they would not contradict, right? So that means if true, they are agreeing, right? Now, if true, they agree except means what? If true with their except means that the except one is something which contradicts. So essentially the question is what? Which of the following, if true, contradicts the passage? That's the simple this thing. If false would contradict means if true will agree. If true will agree except means if true this contradicts. Which of the following is false as per the passage? It's a very, very simple question type. Now you go ahead. Highly vivid writing employing the language of senses can capture the multimodal manner in which humans experience places. This is clearly mentioned in the passage, that this multimodal manner, so spiritual, emotional, visual connection to places. So this is definitely true as per the passage. This is not an answer. Literature provides us with deep insights into the ways in which movement and migration affect physical geography. This is also clearly mentioned, migration, how humans affect landscape, how landscape affect humans, right? So this is also not our answer. Descriptions of places do not need satellite imagery or other visual aids to give a real sense. Yes, this is that they use such a vivid, descriptive language, visual language, that you don't need other satellite images, because this is how human beings experience it through our senses. So it's not saying that it's incomplete, this is complete in itself. Right? Humans do not interact with places in subjective emotional ways because places are only physical, this thing. This is exactly the opposite of what is said. Humans react in an emotional place. We have an emotional and spiritual connection to places that is clearly mentioned. Which of the following, if true, is not as right as per the passage or contradicts the passage? This exactly contradicts the passage. So the answer to this one, option 4. Which of the following is not true of the argument in the second paragraph? What is the argument in the second paragraph? Literature can offer a valuable perspective on this thing. Scientific reports give only this. This gives us everything else about it, right? There is an emotional component which is less real than a surveyor's map. It's saying that science gives us a physical or a statistical understanding of a place. Books give us the emotional understanding of a place. First one, emotional and spiritual experience of a place can replace a map. This is clearly not exactly the opposite. It's saying that, and we are not saying that surveyor's map is not important. It's clearly said this is no less real than, that is also real, but this is also real. It cannot replace it. It can complement it, right? And they're not saying that you don't need a map. So this is not true as per the passage. This is an answer. We'll look at the rest of the options. The spiritual experience of a place may be considered as real. This is clearly mentioned. Emotional component, though subjective, is no less real. It is as real. It is not that this is a fake experience or this is an imaginary experience. So this is stated. So which is why this goes, we want something which is not stated. Literary accounts of a place can be filled with histories manifested as memory and imagination. Again, we think about our memory of a place, so it can be filled with history as well. That is clearly mentioned. Histories of places, last line, of places live on in many forms, one of which is human memory. So this is also there. Analyzing the literary descriptions of a place can give us a sense of how people relate to emotionally. This is also clearly mentioned. So basically, these three are clearly mentioned. The first one, emotional and spiritual experience of a place can replace a map. No, it cannot replace a map. It can definitely complement it. This is the answer. The right answer on this one, option 1. Which of the following is a valid conclusion to draw from the author's statement that the pursuit of such a topic speaks to the valuable knowledge produced from bridging disciplines in combining material from both the arts and sciences to better understand the human condition? Right? So what is the author saying? That studying physical landscapes and literary description landscapes can give us a holistic understanding of human condition, which is currently missing. The author's inference is what? Mix both, right? Don't just look at the sciences and studying the physical landscape or this thing. Study the literary descriptions also. So, which is the valid conclusion? Mixing both arts and sciences or using both can help us understand human condition better, right? Bridging arts and sciences can help us understand human condition. Now, let's look at the options. First one, literary descriptions of emotions we experience in the places we visit can contribute to our understanding of arts and sciences, right? So if you see that this one says left-hand side, arts and sciences, if we combine, we understand human condition, right? So here, anywhere is the human condition mentioned? No. It's saying that if you read books, you can understand arts and sciences better. Is that the argument? No. They're saying combine arts and science, you can understand human beings better. So this is gone. Next one. A comprehensive understanding of the valuable knowledge produced by arts and sciences can best be achieved by human condition, by studying the human condition. Here you have two sides of the equation. Combine arts and science, you will understand the human condition, right? So this will lead to this. Option B is saying, study the human condition, then you'll be able to combine this, right? So instead of X causing Y, option B is saying Y is causing X, which is why it's incorrect. A comprehensive understanding of human condition can be best achieved by combining the findings of disciplines from arts and sciences. Combine arts and sciences, you can understand human condition better. This is our answer. We come to the last option. A comprehensive bridging of human condition can best be achieved by a disciplined pursuit of human understanding. Now, there is a phrase that is used these days called word salad. Word salad means some words are just thrown together for the sake of throwing, right? They actually don't mean anything, right? Or they actually are not telling you anything real. What you already know, they're just going around in circles. It's called a word salad. So it's usually, when people write some description of some artist or something, you're like, what are they talking about actually? It's a word salad. This option is the perfect example of a word salad, but a word salad at least makes sense. The sentence does not make any sense. A comprehensive bridging of the human condition now can best be achieved. For bridging, you need two things. What do you mean bridging the human condition? Right? Doesn't make any sense. By disciplined pursuit of human understanding. How do you pursue human understanding? Right? You study human understanding or by, so this sentence, sometimes, not sometimes, most of the time, I don't have too much respect for the verbal part of the cat paper because here they're not even trying to make a sentence that makes perfect sense, right? This sentence is a senseless sentence. It doesn't make any sense. From what I last heard, the definition of a sentence was it's a group of words that makes perfect sense. This is a word salad that does not make any sense. Right? So this goes, anyway, we know that our option on this one is option 3. The author uses the example of the literary description of a place to illustrate that. For example, the literary description of a place may involve not the environment but light and how the noises are there and everything. Literary and how people from different races or classes can experience the same place in different ways, right? Two people from different social class or or races can experience the place very, very differently. Right? So literary text can account for the way in which absence of other people, animals and so on affects a human observer or so this is what is there. Right? So to illustrate that, we have this paragraph. Let's go to the options. 1. Scientific approaches are more accurate. Author is not saying this anywhere. Straight away you can ignore this. Architects use this. This paragraph is not about architects, so that also goes. Literature can convey how different people experience the same place differently. That's absolutely mentioned, how people from different backgrounds can experience the same place differently. The absence of other people or animals and so on in a place can profoundly affect its inhabitants. Now, this is a close option because this is also mentioned. Literary text can also account for the way in which absence of people or animals affect human beings. It's only saying the text can show how the presence or absence of human beings affect presence or absence of human beings or animals affect humans. Does it say positively affect, negatively affect, strongly affect? It just says how it affects. Option 4 is adding an extra dimension. The absence of other people or animals and so on in a place can profoundly affect, right? So the strongly affect part is not mentioned. Only say we can know how it affects. It can be strong, it can be weak, it can be no effect also. So which is why option 4 is tricky, but that goes. But option 3 is clearly stated how different people can experience a place differently. So the right answer on this one, option 3. Let's look at a question, a summary question. For millennia, in the process of opening up land for agriculture, gardens, grazing and hunting, humans have created ecological mosaics or patchworks. So they're saying that we wanted to open up land for different uses. So hence we have created like a patchwork. So involving a mixture of habitats like meadows and gardens and forests, because for different uses at different points of time, we opened up the landscape. These were not designed as nature reserves. They were not deliberately planned like it's a nature reserve or a forest reserve, but often catered to hugely diverse animal life. So they catered to hugely diverse animal life despite not being planned as a nature reserve. Right? Research indicates that European, so if you're looking at the main idea, so we know how do we tackle a summary question, you break it down into 3 parts, X, Y, Z. Z is the argument. Now Z can be mentioned right at the beginning. So there is one argument and 2 premises, right? So you convert the whole paragraph into 3 big ideas. 2 of them are premises and 1 is a conclusion. So this one, the first premise is, humans have created ecological mosaics for millennia. They were more successful at preserving a vast array of species than meadows explicitly convert this thing for biodiversity. Research indicates that European hay meadows cultivated for animal feed were more successful at preserving vast array of species than meadows explicitly converted. Right? So people naturally, without any plan, they converted some things. Those preserved biodiversity more than things which were explicitly created for biodiversity. Studying the early Holocene, researchers have found that human presence was about as likely to increase biodiversity as reduce it. Right? So of course, not all human created landscapes are the same value. They're saying studying the research of Holocene Holocene era, and they found that it's not, human beings are just as likely to increase biodiversity as to reduce it. Now, this is a very, very key idea, because after all the studies, they found that human presence was about as likely to increase as reduce it. So, it's human presence is either likely to increase, both are the same. It's not like we can say that we'll definitely do harm, or we can say that we are definitely going to do good. Last one. Of course, not all human-created landscapes have the same value. A paved subdivision with astroturf lawns is very different to a village with diverse vegetable and flower gardens. But scientists continue to find evidence that the old idea of humans as antithetical to nature is also wrong-headed, and that rosy visions of thriving human-free environments are more imaginary than real. So the main argument is coming here, all of this, that naturally whatever humans created a mosaic landscape, those increased or preserved biodiversity than some things were planned. Research has shown that more or less we are as likely to improve it as likely to harm. All of this is coming to one argument. there is this assumption that human beings are always antithetical to nature, right? We're always against nature. And there is a great world where if there are no humans, then the nature would have been absolutely a paradisical this thing. Also wrong-headed that rosy visions of thrive in human-free environments. If human beings are not there, this will be this thing. All of that is imaginary because our actions, it's saying that, have also done a lot of positive things. So unlike usually assumed, human presence has not been antithetical to nature, and thriving human-free environments are more imaginary than real, right? So this is the main argument. Now, when we go to the quest options, we know that this part, that human beings have it's an assumption contrary to popular belief. Human actions have not been antithetical to nature, right? And this whole thing of human-free, imaginary, rosy world without humans and environment, that is all false. So that is all imaginary, right? So now let's look at the options. First one, in terms of preserving biodiversity, scientists are finding increasing evidence that human action is not always antithetical to nature, but often assists through the preservation this thing. So it's saying that in terms of preserving biodiversity, we are not antithetical to nature, but often helps in this thing. So more or less seems to have the idea that human beings are not antithetical to nature. So we'll keep this. Next one. In our attempts to shape the human world around us, humans have always created landscapes, meadows, gardens, forests to support diversity and are more successful at preserving them than the parks created. So this is only mentioning the first one, X. It is not mentioning Y or Z, or more importantly, it's not mentioning Z. And what is Z? This view that human beings are antithetical to nature, that is wrong, right? That is not mentioned here. Only X is mentioned. The main conclusion is not mentioned, which is why this goes. Next one. Studying the early Holocene and human practices of millennia, researchers say that while agricultural meadows were not explicitly designed, they actually preserved this thing. Again, belying the idea that humans harm nature, right? So again, this is in a way, it seems like it makes sense. They actually preserved vast array of species, belying the idea that human beings harm nature. It is only marginally mentioning it. A lot of it is given up to saying that Now there is an other important problem here. What is that problem? Studying this thing, researchers say that while not explicit design, now in that Holocene era, this thing, what is the finding that is there in Y? Says that humans are as likely to increase biodiversity as reduce it, right? So option 3 is saying completely different. Option 3 is speaking about X. It's mixing X and Y together. It is using the Holocene era studies, but giving the example from X. In the Holocene area, it says that it's equally likely to increase or reduce biodiversity. Option 3 is not saying that, which is why option 3 goes. Now we come to the fourth one. Contrary to the idea that humans have always hurt nature and that it thrives in human absence, a lot of human actions across history have been equally likely to increase biodiversity than reduce it, often creating varied ecological landscapes. Now, between 1 and 4, that idea that human beings are equally likely to either preserve or increase or reduce, that is only mentioned in 4. And because of the presence of equally likely, we can get rid of 1. And the answer is option 4. In an exam situation, if you ask me, this is a very, very tricky option. Unless you're going with a very, very fine-tooth combed, it might have been a mistake. So in an exam situation, is it a question I would have avoided? Yes, I would have definitely avoided this particular question, and I would not have marked it for sure, because absolutely tricky options in this one. The right answer, option 4. Odd one out, the easiest question type of all, with the before-after method. While taste is related to judgment, with thinkers at the time often writing, for example, about judgments of taste, using the two terms interchangeably, taste retains a vital link to pleasure, embodiment, and personal specificity that is often too elided in the post-Kantian ideas about judgment. A link that Arendt herself was working to restore, right? So that It's very, very painful sentence to read. It seems like a summary passage rather than an odd one out passage, right? Whenever we read this, what do? We have to figure what should definitely come before, what should definitely come after. Before, there is a very, very easy clue. An introduction to taste and judgment and categories. Directly, you can't jump in, while taste and judgment are related as categories. But there is another important time clue. With thinkers at the time often writing. What time? You need to know what time are we talking about. Thinkers at the time. So definitely before this sentence, you need a reference to which time period are we talking about. So unless that happens, the sentence cannot come in. After that, maybe more about taste and its link to pleasure, embodiment on this thing. So we are going to first look for a before. The sentence can only come in after there is a time reference. Now if I go, the first sentence definitely cannot fit where there is no time reference. Next one. Denny focused on taste and in order to highlight what we believed was a crucial but neglectable historical change. Thinkers at that time, which time not mentioned, which is where option 2 goes. Over the course of the 17th century and early 18th century across Western Europe, the word taste took on a new extension of meaning, no longer referring specifically to a gustatory sensation that is in the stomach and the delights of the palate, but becoming for a time one of the central categories for aesthetic and ethical thinking. So around the 17th century, taste was not something that is only for related to food or the mouth, but also about matters of aesthetics and ethical thinking, showing good taste in films or going good taste in paintings and everything. Right? So that reference to time, is it there? Yes, definitely. So 3 is definitely an option. Can it be 4? Tracing the history of Spanish and French aesthetic theory generally also provides a means to discover compelling and relevant writing of a set of thinkers who have largely been neglected by this thing. Right? Now, here, if you look at it, between 3 and 4, why should we reject 4? For a simple reason, because that writers and thinkers at that time, whenever I'm referring to something, the pronoun should immediately follow the noun. That is not this thing. So that time, the reference to that time should come immediately before it. So when you're placing it in 3, immediately before that 17th century thinking is coming in, and that whole technical discussion of taste and judgment, because it's following what? Taste was not just about food, but also about aesthetics and ethics. And then if you introduce the sentence, while taste-related judgment, thinkers writing at the time, often this thing. So this is the perfect fit for it, right? Placing at the end completely removes that reference to time in the previous sentence, which is why this goes. And the right option is option 3. Jumbled paragraph, again, crazy question type. So the way we do it is, you take every sentence, 4 of them this is not jumbled paragraph, this is the odd sentence out also. The previous one, was a missing sentence in paragraph, right? So identify the odd sentence and key in the number of the sentence, as your answer, right? So 4 sentences, what we always do, we give a label to each sentence. 4 sentences will follow the same label. 1 sentence will have a slightly different label. Sporting a copper-colored pixie cut and a pair of pink feather antlers, Torres himself resembles a child's doodle. Now, I'm not understanding. I'm thinking maybe it's a character or it's an animation, this thing. But what do I know? Sporting a copper-colored pixie cut and a pair of this thing, I know that this is a description of some sort of character, right? So what is the first label I can give to the first sentence? It's a description of a character called Torres, and there is a particular look is being described. Next one. His casual millennial delivery peppered with ums and ahs makes surreal concepts sound like items on a brunch menu. Again, it is description of a particular character. Though he may have failed so far in his color scouting mission, scouting means going to search, this R, he hasn't found a new one, he admits, this R leaves you tickled pink. Again, painful to read in terms of the language and everything else. But is this a description of a character or something more? This is getting very, very specific about some color scouting mission. So description of mission of a character is what I would put this at. Like his previous show, My Favorite Shapes, this is an hour of sit-down comedy aided by an overhead camera which relays Torres' theories, illustrated with crayon squiggles on a screen behind him. So now we are getting some perspective. This is giving us a description of the character and also what is the show. Description of a character in a show, right? Where this character is appearing. His inquisitive mind produces interconnected ideas about Catholicism, the blandness of Pixar, and what orange sounds like, while his insights train us to spot highly purple behavior. Again, this is also a description of the character in a show, right? This is the show, this is how the character looks like, and this is how this thing. Now, we know the whole theme is what? Theme is around description of a character in a show. What is the only odd one out? Option 3, where it is getting into specifics about some color scouting mission, right? Now that might be a later paragraph, whereas 1, 2, 4 and 5 are something which is the first paragraph describing to us a character in a show, right? Sentence 3 somewhere comes later in this passage or in this text, where it is getting into a specific mission that the person goes in. So which is why the answer to this one, option 3. Another one, there are 4 sentences given below where properly sequenced would yield a coherent paragraph. Decide the proper sequence of the sequencing of the order of sentences and key in the sequence. So jumbled paragraphs, 4 sentences. How do we do it? Don't read the whole thing at the beginning and then try to sequence. Always go by every sentence and look at it. Is it a starter or is it a follower, right? So as books age, the cellulose and lignin in the paper begin to break down, releasing a mixture of volatile organic compounds into the air. As books age, this is what happens, right? So is this a starter? Yeah, definitely I can think of this as a starter, because it's not as if before this something should come, right? At books age, this is what happens. Old books carry a scent that many people instantly recognize and even love. The first one can be a starter, right? But what is the second one? Second one is definitely a starter, for the simple reason why. What is the definition of a starter? A starter is something that gives you the most meta level information or the most top level information and not specifics, right? 1 is giving you specifics, but 2 is telling that smell from books as books age is something that we instantly recognize. So it is definitely a starter, and as they age, these compounds are released. 1 has to follow 2 somewhere. Is it immediately following? No, it has to just follow 2 somewhere, that much we know. So 2-1 is how I'll keep it in my head. These compounds are benzaldehyde, which give off an almond-like scent, vanillin, which smells like vanilla, this thing. Now, in the actual exam, when I'm doing this question, I'm not even reading the rest. Sentence 1 says releasing a mixture of volatile compounds, and it says these compounds are what? So immediately I know 3 has to follow 1. That is all that I know. The specifics I'm not bothered about. So now I know my sequences 2-1 and 3. Fourth one. This familiar aroma isn't just dust or mildew. It's actually a result of slow chemical changes happening inside the paper and ink, right? Old books carry a scent that people love. This is talking about this familiar aroma. So this familiar aroma is not just dust, it's a chemical change. So this 4 is related to 3, but it is still talking about the scent, per level, this thing. So 2 has to follow, 4 has to follow 2, right? So now we know 2 things. 1 has to know, 1-3 is a link and 2-4 is a link and 2 is a starter. So this has to follow 2. 2-4, so 1-3 is a link and 2-4 is a link and 2 is a starter, means it has to be 2-4-1-3. So we can get this straight away without even, so this question, say even if you don't do in this method is fine, but if you do it in this method, you actually can avoid reading entire, the whole part of option 3 completely, right? Right at the beginning, that has to follow 1. Yeah. So the answer on this one, 2-4-1-3. Again, another jumbled paragraph, 5 jumbled up sentences, 1 to 5 are related to a topic, and 4 form a coherent paragraph and 1 is an odd sentence out, right? So 4 sentences are forming a paragraph. We need to find the odd sentence out on this one. So let's look at this. PFAS are a class of about 15,000 compounds most frequently used to make products water, stain and grease resistant, right? So what's the label? What are PFAS, or what's the function of PFAS? PFAS are products that do this. That's the label. New research suggests that exposure to some common this thing PFAS cause changes in gene activity and then health problems including multiple cancers. So straight away the label. Again, I'm not going to try to understand the meaning too much on this one, or absorb too much information. In science passages, there's too much of information. It's just about PFAS and their link to some diseases. So I know the label on this is PFAS and diseases. The PFAS are compounds are dubbed forever chemicals because they do not break down naturally in the environment. So this is giving a description of PFAS a bit more. They're called forever chemicals because they don't break down all of that. So that's the label. Next one. The research may also point towards other diseases potentially caused by PFAS that have not been identified. Again, the label is simple: PFAS and diseases. The findings are a major step towards determining the mechanism by which chemicals cause disease and could help doctors identify. Again, this is about PFAS and diseases. So if you know, this whole theme is around PFAS and diseases, right? Option 1 is just giving me the definition of what PFAS are. It's not going into some further explanation. The only one option which is not related to this, which is giving some further explanation about what PFAS are, is what? Option 3. Description of PFAS. And it says these PFA compounds are dubbed forever chemicals. But what are these PFA compounds? It's a further description of PFAS, which we don't want because this particular group is in a paragraph is only concerned with what? PFAS are this, only one line description, and the link between PFAS and cancers is getting, and other various diseases is getting established. So the right answer on this one, the odd one out, is sentence number 3. Maybe possibly this paragraph is the longest paragraph ever in the history of CAT passages. I don't think I have seen such a long CAT paragraph. So maybe in the exam, you guys would also have, and if you have read this, those who took the exam might have left this straight away, right? Because it's super huge, right? So definitely in the context of all the passages so far in this particular slot, I would say I wouldn't say whether it's more difficult or less, but it's painful to read, right? And I would definitely kept it right for the end. Right? So let's go ahead and read this. Different sciences exhibit different science cultures and practices. The different fields of science have different cultures and practices. For example, in astronomy, observation. Right? Astronomy is through observation. Until what is today called new astronomy. Today it's new astronomy. Earlier it was just astronomy and observation. Observation had always been limited to what could be seen within the limits of optical light. Indeed, until early modernity, the limits to optical light were also limits to what humans could themselves see within their limited relative perceptual spectrum of humans. So only what we can see, we can see. Beyond that, we cannot do. There is no astronomy. With early modernity and invention of lensed optical instruments, telescopes, astronomers could begin to observe phenomena never seen before. Magnification and resolution began to allow what was previously imperceptible, but within the familiar limits. Galileo, having learned Dutch invention of telescope by went on to build some, from Dutch 3x to nearly 30x telescope, he built on many hundred of its own, which turned out to be the limit of magnificational power without chromatic distortion. It was his own thing. So now see, whenever you're reading science passages, information you shouldn't get caught in, right? You should only follow the argument. What is the argument? For the longest time, whatever was the limit of whatever we could see, that was astronomy. New astronomy started with lenses and optical devices. Galileo was the champ who built a lot on this one. Right, and it was his own telescopes that he made, launching this thing. Isaac Newton's later improvement after Galileo, Newton improvement in the reflecting telescope expanded on the reason of this thing, following usual technology, this thing. Today astronomy has not the benefit of optical and the new astronomy. So I'm just going to read this super fast and just coming towards the end. Thus, astronomy now outfitted with new instruments, smart adaptive optics, very large arrays, this, that, whatever. Is a test illustrates one style of instrumentally embodied science, technoscience. Without these instruments, astronomy is not possible. That means these instruments have been embodied within the science. It's completely a part of it. So which is why it's become a technoscience. Of course, astronomy, with its very recent exceptions of probes to solar systems, bodies, it's sending probes which are going and probing the surface of this thing, remains a largely receptive science dependent upon instrumentation which can detect and receive emissions. So there is recently astronomy has started sending probes as well, where these instruments are going and probing their different services in outer space, right? But it's largely a receptive science, means it can only receive signals, right? Now, what's the topic? Very, very clearly, topic is science and the use of instruments within science, right? Evolution of sciences and the technology that is there at a very broad level. So what's the argument? The sciences have evolved to become techno-sciences with advances in technology and instruments leading to discoveries, right? So because of this, they had reached a limit in terms of what we can do. So all the discoveries now are happening because of this, right? So still remaining within the astronomy benefit, yeah. So basically, that is what they're saying, that okay, this is how it is going. That whatever is astronomy started off in one way, and as the technology got better, we started discovering more and more, right? So which is why it has become a techno science. Super long paragraph. Next one. Contemporary biology displays quite a different instrument array. This was astronomy. The instruments used in biology are different. Also a different scientific culture as well. She cites her own experience coming from mathematical physics into microbiology and takes into account the distinctive instrumental culture in her Making Sense of Life, 2002. That might be a documentary or something, or a book maybe. Yeah. Here, particularly with the development of biotechnology, instrumentation is far more interventional than in the astronomical case. Interventional means what? There is, just like a probe is an intervention, a telescope might be just a reception, right? Intervention means something that intervenes or something that intrudes, right? Microscopic instrumentation can be and often is interventional style. Gene splicing, where cutting the genes, this thing. And other techniques of biotechnology, while still in their infancy, are clearly part of the interventional trajectory of biological instrumentation. Right? So where we are intervened, the instruments are not used to only receive some data, but also to alter things and intervene. Right? Yet, in both disciplines, sciences involved today are highly instrumentalized and could not progress successfully without constant improvements upon the respective instrumental trajectories. So the instruments we have gotten a trajectory, and in both scientific progress also has been a result of that. As there is a trajectory or instruments getting better and better, scientific progress also has gotten better. So minimalistically, one may conclude that sciences are technologically, instrumentally embodied. Right now, instruments are embedded within science itself, but the embodiment styles differ. Styles differ in what? Some are receptive, some are interventionist. And perhaps the last of the scientific disciplines to move into such a technical embodiment is mathematics, which only contemporarily has come to rely more and more about computational machinery. So last such scientific discipline is mathematics, because it's using computation machinery only now, using some kind of instruments. So broadly, what are we saying? What is the argument? The progress in sciences, where astronomy and biology have been used as an example, is been a progress of how the instruments have progressed, how instruments have gotten better. All the sciences are now technologically embodied. They've become techno sciences in a particular way, right? Sciences today are technologically, instrumentally embodied. Some are receptive, some are interventional, and could not progress successfully without constant improvements upon the respective instrumental trajectories. As the instrument trajectories are getting better, and the scientific progress is getting better. Now, such huge paragraph, that's why only two paragraphs, and that's the end of the passage, right? So sciences today are, again, we don't need to go over the main idea. It's the main idea that is there right at the end of the second paragraph, that they're technologically embodied with discoveries stemming from constant improvements in their respective instrumental trajectories. Right? All the following statements may be rejected as valid inferences except, right? So rejected as valid inferences except, meaning which of the following is a valid inference? First one, Isaac Newton's experiments with reflecting telescope were the earliest version of new astronomy. No, earliest version of new astronomy before Newton, Galileo and somebody else also at the earliest example were optical lenses, and Galileo was the one who made a lot. So Isaac Newton's experiments is that the valid inference? Definitely not valid. This goes. Interventionist instruments, or instruments that intervene directly in scientific inquiry, are different from embodied instruments, or instruments that embody scientific inquiry. Right? So this is a huge logical flaw in the sense that they're saying that instruments are embedded within science, be it biology or this thing. Right? That means science and instruments are not, cannot be separated anymore. Right? Embodied instruments are, there is nothing called embodied instruments. Right? So instruments, only two kinds are mentioned: receptive and some are receptive and some are interventionist. So embodied instruments are not a type of instruments, which is what this option is saying, which is why option 2 is incorrect. The author distinguishes between the receptive and interventionist uses of instruments in the sciences by comparing astronomy and biology, right? Because in astronomy, it's saying astronomy has some interventionist thing like probes, but largely it's been receptive, whereas biology has been largely interventionist because of what? Gene splicing and everything else. And so he's introducing the word receptive in the first paragraph and interventionist in the next paragraph. First paragraph is about astronomy, second is about biology, and that's why this is a valid inference on the passage. Advances in telescopy made by Newton reflecting allowed early modern astronomers to observe the phase. No, that was because of what Galileo had made, not Newton, which is why this goes. And the right answer on this one, option 3. None of the following statements, if true, contradicts the arguments in the passage except. None of the following, if true, contradicts, means what? That means none of them contradict means all of them agree. So all of them agree except means what? Which of the following contradicts, right? So none of the following contradict means all of them agree except means which of the following contradicts. So now this thing, instead of none, if it is all, it becomes a different question, right? So simple question, it's saying which of the following statements contradicts the passage. First one, some scientific instruments may be classified as both receptive and interventional in their functions. So we know that something can be a telescope, some can be classified. So it's a spectrum. They're not like this is strictly receptive and strictly informational. So this is not nowhere stated that an instrument can be only one thing, right? For example, a probe can be something which uses magnification as well as intervention, right? So this does not contradict the passage. We can keep this. Next one. Sorry, this does not contradict the passage, so we can reject this. We want something which contradicts the passage, right? Isaac Newton discovered gravity. The discovery of gravity was accomplished without the help of instruments. Yes, this was accomplished without the help of instruments. So this does not contradict the passage. This can go. Like telescopy, microscopy has also sought to move beyond the visible spectrum to be able to detect objects that are invisible in that spectrum. Yes, earlier everything is about what was visible. Now everything is about what was invisible. So this also does not contradict what is there in the passage. That also goes. If you reject 3 options, what you're left with is always the answer. Absolutely no doubt. And here the rejection is absolutely clear. So we go to the last one. Because of the relatively recent entry of computational machinery in mathematics, the field is now only beginning to develop a scientific culture. So it's saying that only because of computation, this is completely contradictory. It is saying that mathematics has only now started to use technology and technological instruments, right? Mathematical science. So only now maybe it's becoming a techno science. Option 4 is saying it's only now that it's become a science in the first place, which is completely contradictory, and which is why this is our answer. We're looking for an option which contradicts the passage. The right option on this one is option 4. Which of the following observations is a valid conclusion to draw from the statement? The sciences involved today are highly instrumentalized and could not progress successfully without constant improvements upon the respective instrumental trajectory. Simple thing. Progress in science is because of progress in the instruments. As instruments kept getting and better, we got newer and newer discoveries. That's it. Nothing else. Right? Now we go to the options. The use of instruments and scientific trajectories must be respected in order to see the use of, there is no instrument in a scientific trajectory, right? Must be respected in order to see successful this thing. Nobody is saying here that there is lack of respect. There has to be respect. So this is not about, respect or lack of respect. It is simply about, as there is progress in instrumentation, there is progress in scientific discovery. As simple as that. So respect does not come into the picture. This goes. Highly instrumentalized work in the sciences has resulted in the progressive improvement of scientific constants. Scientific constants are not mentioned anywhere as a phrase, so straight away goes. The growth of scientific technologies has led to the embodiment of progress in the trajectories of improvement. In the other passage in this slot, I said, some options are like word salads, right? What's a salad? Different words, different vegetables are just thrown in together, right? Or different things. And it's just mixed and it's supposed to make sense, right? But it's just a word salad, it's just a jumble of words which does not really tell anything. Growth of scientific technologies has led to the embodiment of progress in the trajectories of improvement. This sentence itself is not making any sense. The answer we want is something which says improvement in technology of instruments led to improvements in scientific discoveries. So this goes yet another word salad. In both astronomy and microbiology, progress has been the consequence of improvements in instruments they use. Absolutely, scientific progress and improvements in the instruments are linked. This is what has been clearly stated. So the right answer on this one, option 4. Which of the following instruments would be the characterization of instruments in the passage? To which one of the following instruments would the characterization of instruments in the passage be least applicable? Now, how have the instruments been classified? Some are receptive, right, and some are interventionist. Receptive means they receive the data. Interventionist means they are used to, they act on whatever is there, right? So like a gene for gene splicing and everything. So which one can fall into which three? So which one of the following would be least applicable means you can't classify it as receptive and you can't necessarily classify it as interventionalist also, right? Now, scalpel. Scalpel is what the doctor uses to cut you up, right? So scalpel can easily be characterized as an interventionalist thing. You use to scalpel to intervene in a human body during a surgery. So definitely not the answer. Milestone. Can milestone be called something which intervenes in anything? Is milestone use an instrument to cut anything or anything? No. Can milestone be used something which is processing data? No. So milestone itself does not function like an instrument. Maybe it's a tool or a signal that's a sign, but it's not necessarily there. So milestone can be something which is least applicable. It does not receive anything, does not receive any data. It's not used physically to do something. Saxophone. Saxophone, again, receives the human input, which is our breath, to create a music. So definitely this is a receptive thing. Kitchen oven can be classified as both because it receives whatever food we put in and maybe primarily interventionalist, it through convection currents and through heat and everything, it cooks the food for us. So this is definitely more of an interventionist thing. So the only option that does not fit into this thing is a milestone because it's neither receptive nor interventionalist. One more missing sentence in paragraph. Where does this sentence fit? The region's Western customers found it hard to believe that Dhaka muslin could possibly have been made by human hands. There were rumors that it was woven by mermaids and fairies or even ghosts, right? They're talking about Dhaka muslins and how these Dhaka muslins were people could not believe that it was woven by human hands. Now, regions that Dhaka muslin, now we know that, okay, regions, Western customers, Dhaka muslin, maybe we need to figure out which region, but yeah, because they've given Dhaka muslin, it might seem like it's Dhaka only. But why was it hard to believe? Why did people believe that human beings could not make such things? Why is there a rumor that it was woven by mermaids and fairies and ghost is making like a cloth? Right? So after this, I think maybe this can be a concluding sentence also. The region, suppose they give you an entire description, right, of Dhaka muslin is this and this and this and that, then maybe this can be a concluding sentence. The region's Western customers found it hard to believe that it can be made by human hands. Right? Now, we definitely need to know why is it this thing. The description has to be there as to why is it thought that human beings could not make this. Once upon the silty banks of the Meghna river, a miracle was spun. A fabric so light it was called buffed hawa, or woven air. It was so light. Now that is why it is thought to be a miracle. This was Dhaka muslin, the world's most coveted cloth, right? World's most coveted cloth was made once upon a time, and it was like as thin as air, right? And which is why. Now it is telling you where and it's telling you why. So one, it can be a process. So maybe it can be there, somewhere, in one here that the region's Western customers found it hard to believe. Right? Now, or maybe we can say, let's keep one aside. Maybe let's know more about this process. So we can know more about the process. Next one says what? hand spun from a rare cotton called Phuthi found nowhere else on earth, and woven with a 16-step sacred ritual beginning with the cleaning of the cotton using the teeth of a river, this thing. Every spring maple like leaves. Now if you see, in the middle now you cannot get the argument about Western customers. After one, it is going on describing the entire process of manufacture. Spun at dawn on the boats or by sharp-eyed young women, its threads were so fine that the elderly could barely see them. Such a fine thread that old women were not even involved because they could not even see them. Motifs of wildflowers, river breeze, and soul were etched into each piece. Some so light, a 91-meter bolt could pass through a ring, or a 60 feet length inside a snuff box. So you're saying that an entire bolt, 90 meters sari could pass through a small ring, or an entire 60 length can fit into a snuff box. Snuff box is the small this thing that people use, a powder that it's a variation of it's something like tobacco that people use. It draped goddesses, Roman nobles, Mughal emperors, and European aristocrats. Marie Antoinette, Empress Josephine, and even Jane Austen adored its flowing grace. So definitely 2 and 3 are ruled out. Right? Now 2 and 3 are ruled out. It's either 1 or 4. Right? Now 1 and 4, the problem with 4 is what? If you put the sentence there, it's saying the region's Western customers. Right? There is no region reference immediately before. So anyway, they're telling about the region at the beginning. Yes, they're telling us about the region at the beginning. Right? But usually whenever you're referring to something, ideally that should be immediately there. Right? And the Western customers have already been introduced, right? European aristocrats, Marie Antoinette, Empress Josephine, and even Jane Austen adored. So they're already introducing the Western this thing. And then to say that the region's Western customers found it hard to believe that possibly this thing. So it's a tricky thing between 1 and 4. Now, the only reason for me to choose 1, right? We can say that, no, sir, it's putting all of these people, and I want to follow the logic that those people could not even believe, that it was, made by human beings. There was a rumor that, this thing. 2 reasons why. It's a tricky question, right? In an exam situation, very, very tricky. 1 and 4, maybe a question, chances to get it very, very wrong. But reason for 1 over 4 are 2 things, right? The explanation of why it was so, why did people think it was this thing, is immediately following if you place it in 1. Second, the reference to the region also is immediately there in the previous sentence if you're looking at 1. So what follows and what should precede is a better fit with 1, which is why the right answer on this one is option 1 and not 4. Yet another summary question. In 1903, the left-wing feminist Elizabeth Maggie invented the landlord's game, the original version of what became Monopoly. It was designed as a powerful teaching tool to illustrate the dangers of monopolies and how wealth could concentrate in the hands of a few. Right? It's saying that the person who invented Monopoly was so-and-so, and it was, the original name was the landlord's game, and it was created by a left-wing feminist who wanted to teach people, educate people about the dangers of monopolies to this game, right? The game featured a circular path, properties, go to jail. Maggie created 2 rule sets, one monopolist version where players crushed opponents through accumulation, other more radical prosperity version where everyone shared the wealth with this thing. So it's again talking about more description about 2 kinds of games. Years later, an unemployed Charles Darrow sold a simplified version to the Parker brothers. So Charles Darrow is, has sold a simplified version. So the next important idea is that somebody took this game and a simplified version, they sold it to Parker brothers. They paid Maggie only $500 for her patent without any royalty and credited Darrow as the sole inventor. Right? So the game was simplified by another person. It was sold. She only got royalty. She did not get anything else from the sales, and she did not even get her name. For decades, his tale of inventing the game in his basement remained the official story. So he invented the story that he only invented in his basement. That became the original story. While Maggie's name and her original anti-capitalist message were left in the shadows. Right? So for decades, so what is, we are always looking at, whenever I said that summary question, X and Y, 2 premises are usually given to arrive at a third this thing Z. So what is the most important thing? They're giving you all of this information to say that finally the person who actually invented it, a left-wing capitalist, right? So that was and it was an anti-capitalist message also, right? Her name and her original message was left in the shadows. The original inventor got completely sidelined. That is the main summary of this particular passage, right? So that is what we look at. The sidelining of the original inventor is the main idea. Let's go ahead. Celebrated icons of the gaming industry, Charles Darrow and Parker Brothers snatched the feminist icon's original design into a worldwide phenomenon while barely acknowledging her. Now, this thing that they are celebrated icons of the gaming industry and that they snatched the famous icons. So they didn't actually snatch it in the sense that somebody simplified it. They paid her money also for it. She got sidelined. So this thing that they're celebrated icons and then both of them are celebrated icons, this is not really, mentioned anywhere, that all of them are celebrated icons, right? And that they transformed into a worldwide first. So that is anyway there. So all of these are additional icons. That monopoly is a world that here the subject becomes what? That these two people were super celebrated and they were famous, these three people, because I think Parker Brothers are a group of people. So that part is an additional addition, and that they transformed it into a worldwide phenomenon, that also is not necessarily the main idea of it, right? The main idea of this is this lady got sidelined. So that is there, but there are so many additional information, unnecessary additional additions which are not mentioned. Next one. Only one version of Monopoly became famous because of Charles Darrow's relentless basement work. Is the main idea about this person's relentless basement work? No. The main idea is about Elizabeth Maggie getting sidelined. So, which is why, so this whole option 2, carefully refining original game into an engaging, entertaining pastime that is successfully patented slowed, this is not the idea at all, which is why this goes. Parker Brothers' capitalist intent led them to acquiring from Charles Darrow a simplified version of the original game, transforming it into a widespread commercial success while providing her only a minimal financial contribution and granting scant public recognition. Seems like it, we can keep this. Next option. It's ironical that a left-wing feminist lost credit for the landlord's game to an unemployed man who plagiarized and sold one version of the twin game to Parker Brothers for a meager sum, denying her royalties. This option is making the whole idea of this woman as the subject, right? Paragraph starts with the woman as the subject. Paragraph ends with the woman as the subject. Option 4 is completely keeping the woman as the subject. No, sir, but what's wrong with option 3? Option 3 is her game had an anti-capitalist teaching tool. But it's not saying that Parker Brothers had a capitalist bent of mind and with that intent only they acquired this or whatever. Their intention is not mentioned anywhere, right? So the reason to reject 3 would be that their intention is not there, and this transforming it into a widespread commercial success. We know Monopoly is famous, right? But the passage never has this data about they transformed it into a success. That they transformed it into a success is not mentioned anywhere. She made it. This fellow sold a simplified version. They got she got a royalty. And after that, she was not mentioned anywhere. Official story was this. They transformed it into a success is an extra addition which is not there, which is also a reason why we'll reject 3. And the right option is this, option 4. One more jumble paragraph question and a fairly tricky one. Literature on screen suggests something more capacious and defining than citation. Literature on screen is something more capacious, means that is more spacious or more accommodating than just citation. The possibility that literary adaptations are at once both cinema and literature. When you call it literature on screen, that means it's both cinema and literature, right? So it's saying, so this can be a starter. I feel that this can be a starter. Scope for follower also, because word suggests something more, it suggests something more means before this there is something else might be introduced, but this can be a starter because literature on screen means it's a more spacious description than a mere citation is what they're saying. Next one. Even though growing number of films eligible for Academy Awards for Best Screenplay and other medium borrow material from print journalism, franchise characters, television series, comic books, video games and toys, academic studies of adaptation remain stubbornly attached to literature as cinema's natural progenitor. Right? So despite the fact that films are, even Oscar-nominated films, a lot of films these days are made from many, many other sources, like journalism as well as franchise characters and animation series and everything else, comic books. Somehow in all the academic studies, they're thinking that books or literature is the progenitor, or is what is something which gave rise to films, right? That films are adapted from books, that is still the main outdated idea that is there, right? So this also can be a starter. Now I'm thinking maybe this is a starter, right? It is as if adaptation studies, by borrowing the cultural cachet of literature, sought to claim its institutional respectability and gravitas, even while ensuring adaptations enduring aesthetic and methodological subordination to literature proper. So this sentence is saying, why is it stubbornly attached to this thing? Maybe because it wants that respect that is attached to literature and all of those things. So one thing I know, whether I understand the meaning this or not, the sentence 2 is ending with saying that despite many other sources, they act as if literature is the original source of adaptation. And here they're saying adaptation studies are focused on this because it lends some sort of respect or some sort of, cultural cachet or cultural prestige because of it. So definitely 3 has to follow 2, because 2 is talking about, say, academic studies of adaptation, and 3 is talking about adaptation studies. So 2, 3 is a link. Beneath this contradictory notion of film adaptations as not merely hybrid text, but as text holding dual citizenship in 2 modes of representation, is an even more pervasive legacy that haunts adaptation studies, assumption that the primary context within which adaptations are to be studied is literature. This dual notion is what? This is related to what? Not merely hybrid text, but holding dual citizenship in 2. Is that? Dual notions refers to literature on screen. It's the first sentence that it can be both literature as well as what you call movies at the same time, right? So 4 is related to this dual notion. So 1 and 4 is definitely a link. So 2, 3 is a link and 1, 4 is a link. Now between 2, 3 is a link and 1, 4 is a link, we know that now it's either 2, 3, 1, 4 or 1, 4, 2, 3. Now, which one is a better starter? Because the whole thing is starting with literature and on screen, and that sort of a new sort of a, what you call nomenclature and everything. And 2 and 3 are getting a bit more specific, even though Roman films, this thing is literature. So it makes sense, to look at this whole thing with that 1, 4 being a better starter, because it is more generic, and 2, 3 are more specific. Whenever you're doubtful about which one is a better starter, look at which is more generic and more at a top level and which one is more specific, right? So 2 and 3 are more specific, which is why the 2 links are there, 1, 4, 2, 3. I'll go with 1, 4, 2, 3. That's the answer on this one.